There is a reason experienced investors rarely announce what they hold, and it has nothing to do with shame, secrecy, or arrogance. It has everything to do with understanding human behavior, incentives, and risk. The phrase, "Please do not tell people you are in XRP," is not paranoia. It is wisdom earned through history cycles and countless mistakes made by those who spoke too early, too loudly, or to the wrong audience. Welcome back to Crypto Equation, where we do not just talk about assets, we talk about behavior, because behavior is what determines outcomes long before price ever does. The moment you tell people you are in XRP, you change the dynamics around you in ways most people do not anticipate. You invite opinions, judgments, expectations, and pressure that did not exist before. And pressure is dangerous because it alters decision-making. The first thing that happens when you disclose your position is that people stop seeing you as neutral. They begin projecting their beliefs onto you. Some will want validation, some will want reassurance, and others will want someone to blame when volatility appears. None of these roles serve you well, especially in a market as emotionally charged and misunderstood as crypto. Disclosure creates social friction. Friction creates stress, and stress leads to reactive decisions. This is why seasoned market participants keep their positions private, not because they are hiding, but because they are protecting their mental clarity. Mental clarity is the most valuable asset you have in a volatile environment, and it is remarkably fragile once compromised by social pressure. This is especially true for XRP because it sits at the intersection of speculation, regulation, and infrastructure, a place where narratives are polarized and certainty is scarce. Telling people you are in XRP invites debate rather than understanding, and debate often turns personal when money is involved. People rarely argue about ideas, they argue about identity, and when you attach your identity to an asset, you make yourself vulnerable to emotional swings that have nothing to do with fundamentals. This is the first and most overlooked risk of disclosure: identity. Entanglement. When people know you hold XRP, they subconsciously associate your beliefs, intelligence, and future outcomes with that asset. Every price move becomes a referendum on you rather than on the market. This creates pressure to defend, explain, or justify decisions that require none of those things. Markets do not care about explanations, but people do, and their expectations can become a burden that distorts your perspective. Another consequence of disclosure is information contamination. Once you tell people you hold XRP, they begin feeding you selective information, articles, rumors, opinions, all filtered through their own biases. This creates an echo chamber that feels informative, but is often misleading because it reinforces emotional narratives rather than structural understanding. Instead of observing the market, you are now reacting to a curated stream of opinions that may not align with reality. This makes it harder to think independently, which is essential in a market where independent thinking is the primary source of advantage. XRP in particular attracts extreme views, both bullish and bearish, and being exposed to these constantly can erode your confidence or inflate it unjustifiably. Both outcomes are dangerous because they pull you away from disciplined observation into emotional reaction. This is why silence is powerful. Silence preserves objectivity. Objectivity allows you to evaluate information on its merits rather than through the lens of social expectation. Another reason to avoid disclosure is safety. As digital assets become more relevant, attention shifts not only from enthusiasts but from opportunists. People who hear you hold XRP may not have malicious intent, but information travels casually. Remarks get repeated, context change, and suddenly more people know than you intended. Each additional person increases the risk of unwanted attention. This does not mean everyone is dangerous. It means exposure scales risk, even if probability remains low. Institutions understand this deeply, which is why they compartmentalize information on a need-to-know basis. Retail users often do the opposite, sharing casually without considering second-order effects. As XRP grows in relevance, even casual disclosures can have consequences, not because of the asset itself, but because of how humans behave around perceived value. The risk is not immediate but cumulative, and cumulative risk is the hardest to perceive because nothing happens until suddenly something does. This is why experienced participants default to discretion, not because they fear the market, but because they respect it. Another subtle danger of telling people you are in XRP is expectation anchoring. Once people know your position, they begin asking questions like, "Are you still holding? Did you sell? Are you worried? What is your target?" These questions seem harmless, but they create an implicit expectation that you should have answers. Markets rarely provide clean answers, and being asked to provide them creates pressure to pretend certainty where none exists. This leads many people to overcommit to narratives or timelines that later constrain their flexibility. Flexibility is crucial in markets because conditions change, and strategies must adapt. When you have publicly stated beliefs, it becomes psychologically harder to change course because doing so feels like admitting error, even when adaptation is rational. This is known as commitment bias, and it is one of the most common reasons people hold too long or sell too early, not because of market conditions but because of pride. Pride has no place in investing, but social disclosure invites it quietly. XRP holders are particularly vulnerable to this because the asset has been surrounded by long timelines, legal narratives, and delayed gratification. These factors already test patience. Adding social scrutiny on top of that amplifies stress and increases the likelihood of emotional decisions. The market will challenge your conviction regardless, but you do not need additional challenges from social dynamics. This is why the advice is not, do not talk about XRP because it is dangerous, but do not talk about it because it is unnecessary. Your financial decisions do not require public approval. They require private discipline. Discipline thrives in quiet environments where you can think clearly and act deliberately without external noise. Another overlooked aspect of disclosure is how it alters your perception of risk. When people know you hold XRP, they may ask for advice or mimic your decisions. This creates an unspoken sense of responsibility for others' outcomes, even if you never intended to advise them. This responsibility can weigh on you, particularly during volatile periods. You may feel guilty for gains others missed, or anxious about losses others incurred. This emotional burden distorts your relationship with risk because you are no longer evaluating decisions solely for yourself. You are subconsciously considering how they will be perceived by others. This is unfair to you, and unnecessary. Markets do not assign responsibility to individuals, but social circles often do, and that assignment can influence behavior in subtle but powerful ways. The healthiest investor mindset is one where responsibility is clearly defined. You are responsible for your own decisions, and no one else is responsible for them. This clarity is harder to maintain once you publicly disclose positions because lines blur and expectations creep in. XRP's polarizing nature intensifies this because discussions often become ideological rather than analytical. People want to be right, not accurate, and being surrounded by that energy can pull you into unproductive debates that drain focus, and time are finite resources, and wasting them on arguments that do not affect outcomes is costly. Another reason discretion matters is timing. Markets move in cycles and perceptions change over time. Those who speak early often face ridicule or skepticism. Those who speak late face envy or resentment. Neither reaction benefits you. Staying quiet allows you to experience both phases without emotional turbulence because you are not personally invested in public perception. This detachment is powerful because it keeps your attention on what matters: structure, liquidity, and timing rather than validation. XRP's story has been long, complex, and often misunderstood. Those who have remained engaged through uncertainty know how taxing it can be. Adding public scrutiny to that journey multiplies the psychological load unnecessarily. Silence is not weakness, it is strategy. It allows you to observe, adapt, and act without distraction, and it protects you from becoming a symbol in someone else's narrative. The most successful participants in any market are rarely the loudest. They are the most focused. Focus requires boundaries, and one of the most important boundaries is knowing when not to speak. This does not mean hiding forever. It means choosing when and with whom to share information deliberately rather than casually. In the next part, we will explore how discretion protects not only your psychology, but also your strategy, why information asymmetry matters in markets, and how remaining quiet during accumulation phases has historically been one of the most underrated advantages in investing. Discretion does more than protect your mindset. It preserves your strategic advantage because markets reward those who operate quietly during uncertainty and punish those who broadcast prematurely. Information asymmetry is one of the oldest and most powerful forces in finance, and it does not require inside knowledge. It requires patience, timing, and restraint. When you openly talk about holding XRP, you erase asymmetry. You give up the advantage of observing without being observed. This matters because accumulation phases are defined by doubt, confusion, and low conviction environments. These are precisely the moments when speaking invites pushback, ridicule, and pressure that test your resolve remaining quiet. During these phases allows you to accumulate information rather than defend positions. Defense is exhausting and leads to emotional fatigue. Fatigue leads to mistakes, and mistakes are what markets extract value from the loudest participants. This is why silence is not passive. It is active risk management. It is a decision to conserve mental energy for when it is actually needed. Most people assume that sharing information strengthens conviction, but in reality, conviction is strengthened by understanding, not affirmation. Affirmation is temporary. Understanding is durable. XRP requires durable conviction because its journey has not followed the traditional hype cycle. It has involved long periods of regulatory uncertainty, infrastructure development, and delayed gratification. These conditions are psychologically demanding, and those demands increase when you are forced to justify patience to people who do not share your time horizon. This mismatch in horizons is another reason disclosure is risky. People around you may be operating on weeks or months, while you are thinking in years. Their impatience can infect your thinking, subtly making you question strategies that remain sound simply because they are not immediately rewarded. This erosion of patience is one of the most common reasons people exit too early, not because fundamentals changed, but because social reinforcement shifted. Markets exploit this relentlessly because short-term noise is constant and long-term clarity is rare. Those who stay quiet preserve their long-term clarity by minimizing exposure to short-term noise. Another dimension of discretion is safety, not just physical or digital, but relational. When people know you hold XRP, they may begin treating you differently. Some may seek advice, others may express resentment or skepticism, especially if price moves sharply in either direction. These dynamics can strain relationships and create tension that has nothing to do with the asset itself. Money amplifies emotions, and attaching your identity to a financial position invites those emotions into your personal life. This is rarely discussed, but it is one of the most underestimated costs of disclosure. Protecting relationships sometimes means protecting them from information they do not need. Your financial decisions are yours alone, and sharing them rarely improves outcomes but often complicates them. This is not about mistrust. It is about boundaries. Boundaries allow relationships to remain based on shared values rather than financial speculation. Another reason discretion matters is adaptability. Markets change and strategies must evolve. What makes sense today may not make sense tomorrow, and the ability to adapt without explanation is invaluable. When you have publicly stated beliefs, you create an internal barrier to change, because changing feels like admitting failure, even when it is rational. This is a powerful psychological trap that keeps many people locked into outdated strategies long after conditions have shifted. Quiet participants do not face this barrier because they have not attached their ego to a public stance. They can adjust smoothly based on new information without social consequence. This flexibility is a form of optionality, and optionality is valuable in uncertain environments. XRP's evolution will likely involve periods where reassessment is necessary, not because the thesis fails, but because conditions change. Those who remain silent retain the freedom to reassess honestly without pressure to maintain appearances. This honesty with oneself is the foundation of good decision-making. Another overlooked benefit of discretion is learning. When you are not defending a position, you are more open to opposing viewpoints. You can listen without feeling attacked and evaluate information without bias. This is critical in a space like XRP where narratives are polarized. Those who loudly declare positions often stop listening and start filtering information to protect their stance. This confirmation bias blinds them to warning signs or opportunities for improvement. Remaining quiet keeps you curious. Curiosity is far more valuable than certainty because it drives continuous learning and adaptation. Markets punish certainty because it resists change and reward curiosity because it embraces it. This is especially important during transitional periods when new information emerges gradually and requires interpretation rather than reaction. Discretion also reduces the risk of being targeted by misinformation campaigns, whether intentional or not. Once people know you hold XRP, they may send you links, videos, or messages designed to influence your thinking. Some of this is well-meaning, some is not, but all of it adds noise. Noise makes it harder to distinguish signal. And when signal matters most, clarity is essential. Those who remain quiet curate their information environment more effectively because they are not inundated with unsolicited input. This allows them to focus on primary sources, data, and structural analysis rather than opinion cascades. This discipline compounds over time, producing better understanding and better outcomes. The advice to not tell people you are an XRP is therefore not about secrecy, it is about sovereignty. Sovereignty over your attention, your emotions, and your decisions. Financial sovereignty is not just about controlling assets, it is about controlling influence. The less external influence you allow, the more your decisions reflect your actual understanding rather than social pressure. This sovereignty becomes increasingly important as stakes rise because higher stakes amplify consequences and magnify errors. Those who practice discretion early are better prepared to handle increased pressure later because they have already built habits of independence and self-reliance. Another historical lesson worth remembering is that many of the most successful positions in markets were deeply unpopular when they were built. Popularity tends to arrive after repricing, not before. Those who spoke early often faced ridicule, while those who remained quiet simply continued observing and adjusting without distraction. This pattern repeats across cycles because human psychology does not change. People are drawn to consensus and repelled by uncertainty. But markets reward those willing to stand alone quietly until evidence accumulates. XRP has required this kind of patience and discretion because its path has been long and nonlinear. Those who survived this period often did so by tuning out noise and focusing on structure. Discretion was not an afterthought. It was a survival tool. As XRP moves into a phase where attention increases, discretion becomes even more important, not less, because attention attracts noise. Noise increases volatility, and volatility tests. Discipline. Those who have practiced silence find it easier to remain composed because they are not performing for an audience, they are acting for themselves. The final and perhaps most important reason to remain quiet is that markets do not need your commentary to function. They respond to flows, incentives, and structure, not opinions. Your job as a participant is not to convince others, it is to position yourself responsibly and thoughtfully based on your understanding. Trying to persuade others often distracts from this core responsibility and introduces unnecessary risk. The market will eventually reveal outcomes regardless of how loudly people argued. Beforehand, your advantage comes from being prepared, not from being right publicly. This is why experienced participants often appear boring or detached. They are not disengaged, they are focused. Focus is quiet, and quiet is powerful because it allows you to see what others miss. The message, "Please do not tell people you are in XRP," is therefore not a warning of danger, but an invitation to maturity. Maturity in investing looks like restraint, patience, and independence. It looks like understanding when to speak and when to observe. It looks like prioritizing clarity over validation and long-term perspective over short-term affirmation. Those who adopt this mindset are better equipped to navigate whatever comes next, not because they predicted it, but because they preserve the conditions necessary to respond intelligently when it arrives in a world that rewards loudness. Choosing silence can feel uncomfortable, but discomfort is often where advantage lives, and in markets, advantage belongs to those who protect their focus, their flexibility, and their peace of mind above all else. Participants in any market are rarely the loudest. They are the most focused. Focus requires boundaries, and one of the most important boundaries is knowing when not to speak. This does not mean hiding forever. It means choosing when and with whom to share information deliberately rather than casually. In the next part, we will explore how discretion protects not only your psychology, but also your strategy, why information asymmetry matters in markets, and how remaining quiet during accumulation phases has historically been one of the most underrated advantages in investing.